Start. Welcome back, students. We're looking at section 1.4, practice problems for adding real numbers. So we are going to be practicing adding positives and negatives and just using those rules that we learned in the terminology section video that we just finished. All right, so let's look at number 1. We have 6 plus 5. Both of them are positive numbers. We're used to adding positive numbers. This isn't anything new. 6 plus 5 is 11. Pretty straightforward on that. That doesn't change. Number 2 has a negative 6 plus a negative 6. The first thing I notice is both of these numbers have a negative sign. So I need to follow the rule that tells me if they have the same sign, then I add and keep that sign. So 6 plus 6 is 12, and I keep that negative sign because that's what the rule tells me to do. Our next example has negative 8 plus 8. Now we have one of each. We have a negative sign and a positive sign. The rule tells us if we have one of each, we need to subtract the two numbers, find the difference between those two numbers. Well, the difference between 8 and 8 is 0. So 8 minus 8 is 0. But the rule also tells us to take the sign of the larger number. Well, what if our answer is 0? 0 doesn't have a sign. 0 is neutral. It's not positive or negative. It's right smack dab in the middle. So 0 is just 0. Number 4 has negative 4 plus 7. So again, we have one of each sign. We have a negative 4 and we have a positive 7. We're going to subtract two numbers. We're going to take the difference between them. So 7 minus 4 is 3. But do we have a positive 3 or a negative 3? Well, that's the second part of the rule. So remember, the second part of the rule tells us that we take the sign of the larger or the greater number. 7 is greater than 4. So we're going to keep that positive that was with the 7. So our answer is positive 3. Now let's look at fractions. The rules do not change, even though we're solving problems with fractions. So what we need to look at first is the fact that we have the same sign. Both of these numbers have a negative. So that tells me eventually we're going to be adding these numbers and keeping that negative for our answer. But before we do that, I notice that our denominators are not the same. We do not have common denominators. So we need to adjust our fractions to get common denominators before we can add them. A common denominator that we can use between 8 and 5 is 40. So I'm just going to put that up there as a reminder. So negative 3/8. What do I need to multiply 8 by to get 40? I need to multiply it by 5. And again, if I do the bottom, I need to also do the numerator. Then I have the negative 2/5. What times 5 gives me 40? 8. So I'm going to put 8 over 8. Well, negative 3 times 5 is negative 15. And then 8 times 5 is 40. Negative 2 times 8 is going to give us negative 16. And then 5 times 8 is 40. We now have common denominators, so we can actually solve our problem. Negative 15 plus negative 16 is going to be a negative 31. And then we keep our 40 denominator. This fraction can't be reduced, so we are done. So the only thing that was different about that is that we had to think about what rule to use for our negative sign. Other than that, getting a common denominator for our fractions, that's what we've already been doing. That didn't change. That was still what we'd always been doing as far as the rule goes about adding fractions. Let's look at number 6. We have negative 5/6 plus 7/9. We have two different signs. We have a negative and a positive. So I know eventually I'm going to find the difference between these two and then take the sign of the greater. But again, we need to get common denominators first. So we have a 6 and a 9. A common denominator between these two would be 18. All right, so negative 5, 6. What times 6 gives me 18? 3. So 3 over 3 is what I will multiply that by. Well, what times 9 will give me 18? 2. So 2 over 2. Okay, so negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. 6 times 3 is 18. 7 times 2 is 14, and 9 times 2 is 18. Now we can take the difference. 15 minus 14 is 1. Keep the 18. So which one of these numbers is greater to determine if we have a positive or a negative answer? Well, 15 is greater than 14, so our answer is actually going to be a negative 1/18. And we are done. Number 7, still working with fractions, still going to go through the same process, except we're adding a step. We need to turn these mixed fractions into improper fractions so that we can work with them. So remember Texas, 4 times 2 gives me 8, plus the 3 gives me 11. So this fraction is 11/4. 3 times 2 is 6, and then 2 plus 2 is 8. So we end up with 8/3. Now don't get confused when you do the multiplication part of this. Let me make this a little bit neater so we can see what I wrote. When you do the multiplication part of the 3 times the 2, don't get confused and think it's 3 times negative 2 when you're changing it into a improper fraction. Just treat it as though it was a positive. So that would be a 6. And then the 6 plus the 2 is the 8. So we have 8/3. Negative 8/3, actually. Okay. Because our number was originally a negative. Now I need to figure out my common denominator. 4 and 3, we could do 12. Let's do that. So 11/4, if I multiply it by 3 over 3, I get 12 in my denominator. Negative 8/3, if I multiply it by 4/4, I get 12 in the denominator. So 11 times 3 is 33. 4 times 3 is 12. Negative 8 times 4 is going to be a negative 32. And then 3 times 4 is 12. Taking the difference between 33 and negative 32 is going to be 1. And then 12. And then the 33 is greater than 32, so our answer is actually going to be a positive number. Now let's look at decimals. Again, it's not going to be a whole lot different than you would normally how you would normally solve decimals. But let's go ahead and look. Number 8 has 2 negative numbers that are being added together. So the rule tells us if they're the same sign, add them together, keep that sign. So I'm just going to line these up. Line up our decimals when we add decimals, remember? Now I'm going to add these. All right, so 4 plus 3 is 7. 1 plus 2 is 3. Bring my decimal straight down. 0 plus 1 is 1. Our number is 1.37 when we add it together, and then we need to keep our sign since they were both negative. So our answer is negative 1.37. Now let's look at number 9. These two numbers have different signs. One is a negative, one is a positive. So I know by the rule that I need to find the difference between these numbers. To do that, I need to temporarily put the 1.23 as my top number and subtract my 0.14. Temporarily. And then once we get our answer, we'll decide if that answer is positive or negative based on the original problem. So I can't subtract 4 from 3, so I need to borrow from the 2. The 2 becomes a 1, and the 3 becomes a 13. 13 minus 4 is 9. 1 minus 1 is 0. Bring down our decimal, and then 1 minus 0 is 1. So our number is 1.09. But now we need to decide if it is a positive or a negative answer. Looking back, 1.23 is a greater number than 0.14. So therefore, our answer is going to be negative. All right, let's look at number 10. We have a negative 5.839 and a positive 7.42. Again, we have one of each, so we need to find the difference between these two numbers. I'm going to take the larger of the two numbers and put it as my top number, 7.42, so that I can actually subtract. I notice that I have an empty location up here above my 9, so I'm just going to place a 0, a placeholder. I cannot subtract 9 from 0, so I need to borrow. But I can't borrow from the 2 because then I can't borrow from I can't subtract 3 from the 2. So I need to go over a little bit more. Oh, the 4 is going to be an issue. I've got to go all the way over to my 7. So I'm going to actually erase, and I'm going to write it a little bit further down. So I have plenty of room to show you all the borrowing that we're having to do, because it's going to be quite a bit. So let me move it down here like this. Put my placeholder. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way over to my 7 because I have to go all the way over there to make sure I have enough of everything to be able to do the subtraction. So the 7 becomes a 6, the 4 becomes a 14. But now I need to borrow from it, so it becomes a 13, and the 2 becomes a 12. But I've got to borrow from it, so that becomes 11, and the 0 becomes a 10. Now you know why I erased and started over on this problem. All right, so 10 minus 9 is 1. 11 minus 3 is going to be 8. 13 minus 8 is 5. 6 minus 5 is 1. So we're going to end up with an answer of 1.581. Now, do we have a positive number or a negative number? Well, the 7.42 is greater than 5.839, so our number is going to actually be positive. Scroll up to our next section. Now we're going to start solving multi-step problems using GEMDAS and our positive negative rules. So I wanted to make sure I gave you plenty of examples of these. So let's look at this first one, number 11. We have inside the parentheses, inside the bracket, which means we need to do the innermost parentheses. So I'm going to write -8 plus, that's not going to change. I have -1 plus 3. They are different, so I need to subtract and keep the sign of the larger. So the difference between 3 and 1 is 2. The 3 is greater, so it's going to be a positive 2. And then I have my -2 over here that was already a part of the original problem. -8 plus, all right, so we've got 2 plus -2. Two different signs, we're going to subtract them. 2 minus 2 is 0. Keep the sign of the greater. Well, when it's 0, it's just 0. We don't have to worry about signs. So I have -8 plus 0. So even though 0 is not positive or negative, -8 plus 0, we have to kind of treat it like they have two different signs, even though 0 is just neutral. So I'm going to subtract them and get 8. And 8 is greater than 0, so our answer is -8. Pretty straightforward, makes sense, it's logical, but I want to try to explain why it's -8. All right, let's look at the next one. We have decimals here. It's not going to be that bad. We just need to deal with the innermost parentheses first, the bracket. And that is a positive 3.3 plus a negative 4.9. They're different signs, so we're going to subtract them and take the sign of the greater. So 4.9 minus 3.3 is 1.6. The 4.9 is greater, so I'm going to keep the negative. Now I have a negative 7.1 plus a negative 1.6. They have the same sign, so that means I add them and keep the sign. So 6 plus 1 is 7, and then 1 plus 7 is 8, and they're both negative, so our answer is a negative 8.7. Number 13. We have 5 plus negative 10. There are two different signs, so we're going to subtract them and keep the sign of the larger. So that gives us 5, because 10 minus 5 is 5. The 10 is greater, so it's going to be a negative 5. Looking at our next one, we have negative 2 plus negative 6. Those are both negative, so we're going to add them and keep the sign. So 2 plus 6 is 8, and our number is going to be negative 8 because they both have a negative. Now we have a negative 5 plus a negative 8. Again, they're both negative, so we're going to add them and keep the sign. So 5 plus 8 is 13, and we keep that negative sign for an answer of negative 13. Number 14, negative 9 plus 15, different sign. So we're going to find the difference, which is 6, and then keep the sign of the greater, which is the 15, so it's going to be a positive 6. 12 plus 7, they're both positive, so we're just going to add them and keep them positive. So 12 plus 7 is 19. 6 plus 19 is 25. And since they're both positive, it's a positive 25. Looking at number 15, we have 3 different fractions here. We need to get common denominators of our first 2 fractions that are in the brackets together to see if we can combine them. The denominator that I'm thinking about working with is 24, because 8 goes into 24 evenly, 3 goes into 24 evenly, and so does 6, the future fraction that we're going to be working with. So if we can go ahead and change all of our fractions at the same time, then we can do all of that in one step and then work forward solving it from there. So let's go with 24 as our common denominator that we're looking for. All right, so within this bracket, I have negative 3/8. 8 times 3 gives me 24. So I'm going to write 3 over 3. Plus the 2 over the 3, I'm going to multiply it by 8 over 8 because 8 times 3 gives me 24. Then I have my negative 5/6 over here. 6 times 4 gives me 24. So I'm going to multiply this by 4 over 4. All right. Negative 3 times 3 is negative 9. And then 8 times 3 is 24. 2 times 8 is 16. 3 times 8 is 24. Plus negative 5 times 4 is negative 20. 6 times 4 is 24. So now we have fractions with all the same denominators, and we can actually solve the problem. All right, so negative 9 plus 16, they have 2 different signs. So I'm going to subtract them and then keep the sign of the larger. 16 minus 9 is 7 over 24. And then 16 is the larger number, so that's going to be a positive 7 over 24. I now have this plus negative 20 that I need to deal with, negative 20 over 24. So 7 plus a negative 20. Those are 2 different signs, so I'm going to take the difference, which is 13 over 24. 20 is greater than 7, so my answer is going to be a negative number. Looked a lot harder than it was. All right, I'm going to erase just a little bit right here so that it doesn't distract from the next problem. Number 16, again, we have 3 different denominators, so we need to get a common denominator between those 3 numbers. So a common denominator for 6, 9, and 3 would be 18. I'm going to go ahead and adjust these just like we did on the other one. So negative 5 6 times 3 over 3 plus my bracket 7 ninths times 2 over 2 plus a negative 1/3 times 6 over 6 bracket and equal. All right, so negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. 6 times 3 is 18. 7 times 2 is 14. 9 times 2 is 18. Negative 1 times 6 is negative 6. 3 times 6 is 18. Now we have all common denominators and we can go ahead and solve. 14 18ths plus negative 6 18ths have two different signs, so we need to subtract and keep the sign. So 14 minus 6 is going to be 8 over 18. The 14 is greater than the 6, so it's going to be a positive. And then I'm going to rewrite this part. All right, so now we have negative 15 plus a positive 8. Different signs, so we're going to subtract, keep the sign of the greater. So the difference between 15 and 8 is 7. So we have 7 18ths. 15 is greater than 8, so we're going to have a negative answer of negative 7 18ths. All right, 15. Now don't confuse 15 and 16, these two problems. Those are not brackets, those are absolute value signs. I wanted to give you a couple of examples with those just so you could see the difference. All right, so the absolute value of negative 3 plus negative 8, those have the same negative signs, so we're going to add them and keep the sign. And they're going to stay in the absolute value symbol for now. So that's going to be negative 11. We're going to do the same thing with the other side of the addition sign. Negative 3 plus negative 8, that's going to be negative 11 in that absolute value symbol. All right, so now before we can add them, we need to bring them out of the absolute value symbol since we've fully simplified within that symbol. So that comes out as a positive 11 plus a positive 11, because remember, whatever we take out is a positive number. So then we end up with 11 plus 11 is 22. All right, let's look at the next example. We have the absolute value of 2 plus negative 11. I'm going to take the difference since they have different signs, and that's going to be 9. The 11 is greater, so it's negative 9. In our second absolute value symbol, we have negative 4 plus 5. Take the difference since they have different signs. That's 1. The 5 is greater, so it's going to be a positive 1. Now we need to take them out of our absolute value signs. So that's going to be 9 plus 1. And our answer is 10. All right, here's our last 4 practice problems. These are translating and solving. So number 17 says the sum of negative 4 and 10 and negative 2. Those ands mean addition. So we have negative 4 plus 10 plus negative 2. Now we need to solve from left to right when we're dealing with addition and subtraction. So remember, a negative sign is the same as a subtraction sign. A positive sign is the same as an addition sign. So negative 4 plus 10, two different signs, so we're going to subtract them and keep the sign of the greater. That's going to be 6. The 10 is greater than the 4, so it's going to be a positive 6. I'm going to rewrite the rest of the problem. And now I'm going to combine the 6 plus negative 2. Different signs, so we're going to find the difference, which is 4. 6 is greater than 2, so it's going to be a positive 4. Number 18. We have negative 3 added to the sum of negative 12 and 23. So we have negative 3 added to the sum of negative 12 and 23. So we need to do what's in our bracket first. Negative 12 plus 23. Those are two different signs, so I'm going to find the difference, keep the sign of the greater. The difference is going to be 11. And since 23 is greater, it'll be a positive 11. Negative 3 plus 11, two different signs, so we're going to take the difference, which is 8. 11 is greater than 3, so it's going to be a positive 8, and that is our answer. 19. The sum of negative 23 and negative 11 increased by 16. Notice the comma, and also notice the sum of. So the sum of negative 23 and negative 11 increased by 16. Negative 23 plus negative 11, they have the same sign, so we're going to actually add them and keep the sign. Negative 34 and 16 have different signs, so we're going to take the difference, which is 18, and keep the sign of the larger. 34 is larger, so it's going to be negative 18. Last problem, 15 increased by negative 10, added to the sum of negative 34 plus 13. So 15 increased by negative 10, let's start there. Added to the sum of negative 34 and 13. 15 plus negative 10. Two different signs, so we're going to take the difference. 15 minus 10 is 5. Keep the sign of the greater, which is 15, so we're going to have a positive 5. Negative 34 plus 13, again, we have two different signs, so we're going to take the difference, which is 11, and keep the sign of the greater, which is the 34, so we're going to end up with a negative 11. 5 plus negative 11, we have two different signs, so that is going to mean finding the difference, which is 6. The 11 is the greater number, so our answer is going to be negative 6. All right, before we end, let's read our quote. Mathematics is, in its own way, the poetry of logical ideas, Albert Einstein. I hope you guys are having a great day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.